Hello everyone, and welcome to Lesson 8, Inclusivity and Differentiation in the Language Arts Classroom. All right, here we go. I don't think many of us can doubt that we need to be talking about inclusion in our classrooms. Right now, I don't know if it's because of COVID, but these things are really starting to unfortunately bubble up and surface in both our American neighbors' culture as well as in our own dealings with our Indigenous communities here. Most recently, over the last few days, is the burning of a fisheries facility in Nova Scotia and an Indigenous fishing facilities in Nova Scotia. So I think we absolutely need to be talking about how can we be promoting inclusion in our classrooms. And I don't think it's really just a nice thing to do. I think it's imperative that we talk about this in our classrooms. So how do we do that? Okay, so let's look at are our schools inclusive? Oh, there I am. I'm in with, so I'll move myself over here. So this is from, I went to the International Literacy Association, the ILA 2018 conference, and Cornelius Minor was one of the main speakers there. And he is all about, he doesn't really like the word diversity, but he's all about inclusion, and he challenges us to think about our system of school. So these are his thoughts on school as a man of color in the United States and as a middle school teacher. So we have become used to the problem of color and LGBTQ+. We have become used to these certain children having less. We have to change the system of oppression, and school is one of them. Isn't that interesting? We kind of think of school as enlightening, but he sees it as a system of oppression. If we don't, we are not as nice as we thought we were. When he was speaking at the conference, he was speaking to, thousands of basically white middle-class women. And he said, you all think that you're nice white women, and maybe you're not so much if you can continue to uphold the oppression that's happening in school. It was pretty interesting. Schools are sexist, classist, and racist because our society has embraced these systems. Again, that concept that school actually mirrors society. We have to imagine new things for our schools. We are not the child-centered teachers we say we are if we do not challenge an oppressive system and doctrine. We have to construct the system. We need to be lovingly insistent and warmly demanding. And we need to be disruptors of the system. Okay, so I would encourage you right now to stop me and go and watch this video of Cornelius Minor being interviewed on an educational kind of channel, and just listen to how he talks about schools and how maybe our schools are not quite as inclusive as we thought, and how it's our responsibility as individual teachers to take that on. Okay, hopefully you enjoyed Cornelius there. I think sometimes especially when we live in a place like Medicine Hat, where we say, inclusion, people of color, people of different gender situations, it's not really here. And we have, like, I have my class, I have no need to include everybody because everybody's just white middle class. Again, I want to challenge that by having you go to one of my favorite educational writers, Jennifer Gonzalez, and Cult of Pedagogy. And I want you to, again, I've slotted in about 10 minutes for you to actually read through this website. Why white students need multicultural and social justice education. Because again, I think sometimes we think, oh, we have a homogenous group of white farm kids. I don't need to worry about inclusion. You need to worry about inclusion. Okay, so stop me again, go there and have a read through that. I slotted in about 10 minutes, like I said, so hang out there for a bit. Okay, again, hopefully you're starting to realize that inclusion must be a part of every classroom, every classroom that that we are in. Let's pull it a bit tighter around our ELA classrooms now. So this, whoa, I got to catch up to my slides over here on this one. This is Rudine Sims Bishop, and she wrote an article back in 1990 called Books, actually, I want to make sure I have this right. Yes, books need to be mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. So this is not really a new concept for 2020. Let's try, not 220, 2020, that's what we're in. She wrote this in 1990. So we're talking 30 years, this idea of inclusion has been around. Basically, I'm just going to read you a quote from her article. Books are sometimes windows, offering views of the world that may be real or imagined, familiar or strange. These windows are also sliding glass doors, and readers have only to walk through in imagination to become part of whatever world has been created or recreated by the author. When lighting conditions are just right, however, a window can also be a mirror. Literature transforms human experience and reflects it back to us. And in that reflection, we can see our own lives and experiences as part of the larger human experience. Reading them becomes a means of self-affirmation, and readers often seek their mirrors in books. So oftentimes, for our children of color, for our LGBTQ plus children, for maybe students that are new Canadians or immigrants, oftentimes they do not see themselves mirrored in books. They often see through to a different culture, to a different life, to different people, and it may open them up to new possibilities. But oftentimes, kids never see themselves mirrored in books. So if you want to, I would go to and have a look at this Reading Rockets article by Rudine, and you don't have to on this one, but it's just interesting to hear her and hear how she has actually go to her video. It's about a minute video, about halfway down, and it's just interesting to hear her talk and that she's been saying this for 30 years. Okay, so what happens when you don't ever see yourself in a book? So for a lot of our students who, again, are new Canadians, are people of color, they don't sometimes see themselves in books ever. This is Grace Lynn. She is the author of Year of the Dog, one of the books that most of you have read in book club. And I want you to, again, pause me, and I want you to watch this TED Talk that she did about what happens when you never see yourself in a book as a student. Okay, so go to her video now and then come on back. Super interesting, isn't it? As an author now of children's stories, she never saw herself in a book, and that was one of the impetus for her to ultimately become an author. Okay, so let's pull it tight now. Let's pull it tight to some of, as a teacher, are your diversity strategies missing the mark? Again, this is from Cult to Pedagogy. And again, these are just some sort of really practical ways for you to be more inclusive. Because we talk about, well, be more inclusive, but then we don't give you sort of practical ideas. So then again, these are some practical ideas. Read, read, read. So read about the plight of our friends that are protesting in Black Lives Matter. Read about our own Indigenous people who are constantly fighting to be recognized in our own country. So read, read, read. There's lots of blogs, there's lots of articles out there. Be open to your own to feedback. If you make a mistake, and you will, learn from the feedback. I want to tell you a story about Christy and I. A few years ago, we did an oral, we thought we'd combine and do an oral storytelling unit or lesson. So we did, and we brought in Alberta Indigenous stories, and we had the students read the stories and read them out loud, and and we thought it was great. And then we got back to our office and we went, oh boy, that that was not right because the oral storytelling is sacred, and we had just sort of thrown these stories out to our students without really prepping them. So we went to Whitney at the time, who was the Indigenous coordinator at MHC, and we said, did we goof? And she's like, yeah, you guys goofed. But I'd rather you goof and I'd rather you take a step and goof than never take a step. So I understand, like some of you in your lesson plan evaluations, or sorry, your lesson plan reflections, talked about how, you know, those topics of power and death felt like you shouldn't go there, and I appreciate that. But I want to challenge you that if you never take the step, if you're paralyzed, you won't ever go and hit those things head on. So be open to feedback, especially if you go and do something that maybe is culturally, like we did, was not culturally appropriate. You're just like, okay, yep, my bad. I'm gonna fix that. I'm not gonna do that again, but I am gonna go in this direction instead of never taking the step. Okay, number 3, expand your circle. Spend more time in your school community and can be a great way to get to know your students' lives better. Again, if you are in a school that has a real multicultural student body, hang out after school when the parents come, and talk to them, and expand your own personal circle to include people that are from different cultures. And it doesn't mean that you have to be buddy with all of them, but it will just be really interesting. I went out to Brooks a couple times for practicum supervision, and wow, I loved being there. I tried to actually plan it so I was there at the end of the day so that I could actually just hang out and talk with some of the parents and just go, wow, it was super, super interesting. Or just watch them interact with their kids. Okay. Number 3, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Embracing the new and different is not always easy. It can be okay. If you can be okay with that, you'll learn faster. So again, I appreciated that you wrote in your reflections, I was a little uncomfortable with that. That's a good place to be. So because we're pushing into areas that are touchy, and we need to take that step. We can't be paralyzed. Don't forget gender when working toward inclusivity. Remember that gender and sexual orientation are all important factors. As teachers, generally, most teachers in elementary are overwhelmingly female, middle-aged, and usually middle class. Okay, so, but we have a real diversity of students. So if you are a white woman, middle class teacher, acknowledge that's who you are, but embrace that there are lots of others. Whatever you bring, embrace that, and then realize that there's a lot of other ways to look at the world. Number 6, beware imperceptible distance. You may be leaning away from students who are different from you, so just keep an eye out for this. So we always will gravitate to those kids who are like us, but as a teacher, your professional responsibility is to engage all the students. So those students that you don't feel as attracted to in a really positive professional way, you need to address that in yourself. Oh my goodness, that's my phone. Hang on. Hey, that's funny. I actually thought before I started, I need to turn my phone off, and I didn't. That was my sister. I'll give her a call back. Later. Okay, so number 7, you need to validate code switching. So this is when students will come to school and they will have to act differently or even use different language than they do at home. So you want to help those kids figure out how to do that because it's tricky, especially for some of the young ones. It's tricky in there. Embrace the elephant in the room rather than avoiding difficult or awkward topics. Discuss them openly and respectfully. Again, that's that not being paralyzed. And number 9, identify and fight bias. We all have our own biases. The better you get at identifying and correcting yours, the more you'll grow. So you need to challenge your own bias. You need to be aware of your own bias and challenge it in order so that you can actually have an inclusive classroom. Okay, let's jump in now to who will actually be in our classrooms. So we will have linguistic and cultural diversity almost, I would think almost in every classroom in Alberta, especially if you end up in cities like Calgary or Edmonton. There will be linguistic and cultural diversity. So Calgary's ethnocultural makeup is changing rapidly. There's a significant increase in the number of Canadian-born as well as immigrants belonging to visible minority groups. According to Statistics Canada, Calgary's visible minority population is expected to grow from 22% to 38% to 2006 and 2031. However, based on the average rate of growth for the last 3 federal census, the visible minority population is projected to reach upwards of 40% in Calgary by 2020. When I was living in Calgary, I had student teachers who taught in the Northeast, and they had 85 to 90% were visible minorities in their classrooms, and they had like 27 languages spoken. It was pretty amazing and pretty exciting, but very, very diverse. Okay, let's look at our ELL. We're going to spend some time with ELL, then we're going to spend some time with FNMI students, and then we're going to look a little bit at some multicultural aspects. Okay, so ELL in Alberta schools, again, overall about 25% of our K-12 students are ELLs. Every school faces the challenge of working with a linguistically diverse population, but some urban schools have as much as 90 to 95% of their enrollment identifies as needing language learning support. Okay, again, you might have, if you have 90 to 95%, you are probably going to have multiple languages. So it's not this sort of monolithic nature of languages. Some of your ELL students will have strong first language backgrounds, others will not. Some will have an intact educational background, others will not. Some of them will have arrived when they were 4, some will have arrived when they're 8, 12, 18. Okay, so this means that you need to be aware that there are differences in your ELL students, and that you may be dealing with students who have a first language different first languages in your classroom. Okay, let's look at some myths. These are sort of interesting. I want you to think about, before I tell you, I want you to think about whether the answer to this myth is yes, no, or yes and no. So the younger the better. The younger you start learning a second language, the better. So what do you think? Yes, no, or yes and no? It's actually yes and no. So some researchers argue that the younger the better. Others actually in their research have said that they've looked at students who start learning English at 6 and then other students that start at 12, and by the end of high school they're basically at the same point. What they say is a student that starts later, when they're 12, actually has an idea of how language works, and that they're better able to grasp the concept of language, whereas when they're 6, they don't actually understand the language. Now, the only sort of no part of that is the pronunciation. If a child starts earlier or younger, they end up sounding almost like an English native speaker, whereas a child who starts at 12 or 14, their pronunciation won't be quite as developed. Now, you might say, yeah, but what about BICS and CULP? Remember, basic, we looked at this in 371, basic interpersonal communication skills versus cognitive academic language proficiency. And basically they're saying that it takes a long time to get to that cognitive level, even if they start at a young age. They're still looking at that 5 to 7 years to get into that really cognitive understanding of language. But even if they start at 6, they're not getting into that cognitive level because they don't have an understanding of the language itself. So younger the better, depends on the research that you read. Some say yes, some say no. It's a little bit mixed right now. It's natural, quick, and easy. Little kids especially just soak it up like sponges. Yes, no, or yes and no. Again, yes and no. Little kids do benefit from a lower affective filter, like they're not quite as paranoid about making mistakes. They're willing to take more risks and they learn through play and interaction. They might make it look easy, because if you have a K-3 student, they usually will pick up the language quicker and they sound like they really understand, but it's still tough. It's still tough for these kids, for our ELL students, to pick up English. So don't just think that just because they're little that they're going to just pick it up. The sounding good myth: once you speak English, you know the language. Again, it's a bit of a yes and no once, because again, they have the oral language and they have the pronunciation, which helps them, of course, in communication. So that's the yes, if they actually sound good. But on the other side, they might not have the reading or the comprehension skills. So that's the no side of that one. Okay, early integration and immersion provide the best opportunity to learn. Whoa, come back. To learn English. Again, that's a yes. Early integration, it's the best situation because of course they just get more of it, but they still need help. So we can't just kind of say, okay, this child is 6, they're an ELL learner, but they're young and they will just soak it up, so I actually don't really need to worry about them. That's not true. You still need to help them, but this is the most yes in there. Okay, number 5, all children learn the same way. Should be a resounding no, right? Within our ELL population, we have the same situation that we have with our other children in our class, with our English as a first language students, is that we will have a variety of learners in our class. Okay, challenges for our ELL students. Basically, there are a few concessions are made to our ELL students in their school and community. They just basically, they might get a little bit of pull-out time, but basically they're kind of in the classroom. They're kind of shoved in there, which is tricky for them. Challenges: they struggle to express their knowledge. Excuse me. They may know a lot about the subject. So say you're doing dinosaurs and this kid knows a lot of dinosaurs, but they're a Spanish speaker. They're going to be frustrated because they know how to say it, but they can't express it. I remember this when my family and we traveled to France, and my 2 girls and my husband are fluent in French, and so they were chatting away to everybody, and I can understand most, but I don't, my oral skill is a little rusty, and so I would sit there, and then finally I'm like, I gotta go, because I was just so frustrated because I didn't feel smart. I was like, I have all these opinions, I have all these ideas, but I can't express them. And so I was really frustrated. So your students may also be frustrated. The challenges are they are often exposed to informal use of language, so like slang and things like that. And then when they try to incorporate that into academics, then they, like, if we say gotta or gonna, then they write that and then we slam them for it, kind of thing. So again, they're using the informal use of language without the knowledge of the more academic. They're expected to acquire more sophisticated and complex knowledge. Again, think about those kids that are coming in like grade 8 or grade 10. Those concepts are big. They're big concepts, and yet they don't have those language skills to support that. So again, they have it's tricky. They're expected to express this sophisticated and complex knowledge, which they can't because they don't have the language. They're expected to learn all the Alberta curriculum, which you now see is huge, and they're doing that at 8 years of age and in a second language. That's a big thing. And then they have to deal with cultural conflicts. So they may have some conflicts with, they're not having English being spoken at home, and so they're conflicted with English at school and their native tongue at home, and maybe some cultural differences around education as a basis. So those are some challenges. Again, just keep in mind for our ELL students as we're talking about inclusion. How can we be great ELA teachers? How can we be great ELL teachers? I think if you think about being an effective teacher overall, like you are bringing in group work, you're doing lots of visual representations, you're using lots of manipulatives, you have words all over the word wall, you do some direct and you do some indirect instruction, you let them do some hands-on, and then you do some academic. And I don't want this to sound like it's a cop-out, but I think we often think, oh, I have to teach my ELLs in a really different way than I teach my native English speakers. No, use the same great aspects that you know about teaching to teach your ELL students, because basically they are kids and they want to be loved and they want to belong and they want to feel successful. And so if you are using all of the techniques that you know as a teacher with your ELL students, that's will probably be the best way to teach them. Okay, basically, I cannot give you, again, all the ideas around how to teach ELL students, because even if I could, I wouldn't want you to have that, because then it would be basically a cookie cutter. So then if an ELL student entered your classroom, you'd be like, oh, I know how to teach ELL students. Kabam! On goes the cookie cutter onto these students. And that's actually probably not the best way to teach them. So what I want you to do is be smart and know where you can find materials that will help you understand ELL learners and give you maybe some specific things to add on to your really effective teaching practices. So things like, how can I be a great ELL? Well, look at some resources. So these are 4 books that I know are in the library, and I've had to go through all of these, and I think that they have some really practical ideas. So if you're looking for books for your practicum, go to the library and nab these ones, as well as, again, I'm gonna move myself back up here, as well as these are 2 amazing resources from Alberta Education. So Learn Alberta Supporting English Language Arts Benchmarks and the ESL Guide. These are pretty big documents. They should go on your ePortfolio so that you can refer back to them. So that when you get out there on your practicum and you go, oh, I have an ESL or an ELL student, how can I support them? You have these resources. Okay, let's go on. So for Collaborate, what I want you to do is look specifically at policy and practice numbers 2, 4, 5, and 6 from your Lesson 8 reading list. Okay, so this is your reading for this week. I want you to link examples to your own practicum or life experience, and then I want you to give other examples that fit the criteria. And then what we're going to do is we're going to discuss those in Collaborate in small groups. So that's your Collaborate activity for ELL. Based on your reading, shouldn't be anything extra because it's your reading. Okay. When we're talking about inclusion, I think we have to consider our FNMI students. So again, we need to be thinking about these students not as a monolithic group, but they may speak English, French, or First Nations, Métis, and Inuit language, or a combination of languages in their homes. Okay, so they're not all coming in as the same. They have cultural and language diversity between nations and regions. They have skills in their first language that range from minimal to fluent, and they may use culturally specific nonverbal communication and have specific cultural values and beliefs regarding listening and speaking, passing of stories, and sacred relationships. So again, they're coming to us with really a different way of looking at life, and we have to check our own biases and say, okay, they are looking at life this way. I look at life this way. How can we make this an amazing classroom experience with both of our views being honored? Okay. Again, this is a little bit of a review from 371 and probably Christy's class and probably other readings that you have done around FNMI in Canadian culture. Basically, they are still dealing with Eurocentric discrimination. Basically, Canadian culture is based on Eurocentric frameworks and norms, and our FNMI colleagues have just had to deal with it, which is not where we want them to be. They are still dealing with the colonization and oppression, being marginalized, being powerless, violence happening to them and nothing happening about it, and exploitation. Again, Aboriginal knowledge, voice, and vision not recognized. It's starting. We've pushed in the right direction, but it still needs to roll a lot farther. And then personal barriers for our FNMI students. A lot of poverty, some abuse, and living conditions are sometimes quite abysmal, and other times they are fine. But again, I think we really need to, when we're talking about inclusion, we really need to be aware of our FNMI students. Okay, so this is again for Collaborate. I want you to look in the ORCA reading for this week. I want you to look at some of the hurdles for our FNMI students. And then I want you to have a little discussion about the support for FNMI students in the classroom and support for FNMI students in ELA classroom. How can we support these students? And you can get this from the ORCA reading. You can bring in ideas from Christy's class, from your other readings, anything in there. Okay, so that's, again, we're going to have that little discussion in our Collaborate time. Okay, and multicultural education. Again, we will have students in our classrooms that are from other cultures. We will have Syrian refugees. We will have people that have immigrated from Mexico. We will have people that have come from France, right? So we need to be acknowledging that we have these students with these diverse backgrounds. I think what we need to do is focus on sameness instead of difference. And you're like, yeah, but you've been talking about all these differences. Yes, we need to acknowledge the differences. That's that whole, we can't be colorblind. We can't say, oh, I just teach students. And I know I brought this up at 371 and we had a bit of a go with it. This whole idea of we have to acknowledge that people have come through their life the way that they have come through their life. And if we just say, well, I'm just gonna put everybody in the same pot, that's more of a melting pot kind of situation, okay? For our little people in our classroom, I think we need to focus on sameness instead of difference. We need to see them as kids that need love and they want to belong and they want to have success and they want to feel at the end of the day that they've accomplished something, okay? So again, that sort of human basis with an acknowledgement that they all come from a different lifestyle, okay? Be as authentic as possible, but again, don't be paralyzed. So again, going back to that, how can you make sure that you are actually including diversity properly in your classroom? Again, read about, if you have a Syrian refugee in your class, you need to read up on what's going on in the Syrian refugee situation. And then you need to kind of try some things out learn one word in the language of the Syrian refugee student. And if you say hello in their native language, you will be their friend forever. Okay, find and utilize vetted resources. So this is the Alberta Teachers Association and Canadian Multicultural Education Resources. They have pre-made resources and ideas in all of these areas, and so use them. Here is the link. I did change this link on your reading list. So if you read it before yesterday at like 1, it's the same stuff. I just added in a different one. So if you didn't read it and you're still going there, then go to the link that's on your reading list or this particular one. Okay, so in Collaborate, again, we're going to use the reading from the ATA and the Multicultural Education Resources. The one that's on your reading list that was basically the same as before. I just added in a couple extra ones because those resources became available. I want you to choose a resource that looks at students in your practicum class. So if you have a student from that is Arabic, from Indian, Filipino, Pakistani, Somali, Karen, or South Sudanese immigrant students, if you have a student that you know in your practicum class, then have a bit of a go with learning a little bit about their culture. If you do not, then pick one that sounds interesting or that you know the least about. So if you're like, I don't know anything about Filipino culture, have a read through the Filipino culture book. And then be ready to summarize your learning for a small group of your colleagues. So you'll, again, have a chance to talk about it in Collaborate. Okay. Are our LA classes inclusive? Again, this is from my International Literacy Association 2018 conference. Again, I'm just going to read these to you because there's some amazing quotes that I took from across different speakers and across different sessions. We have to save a child's now, not their future. We have to work with those who are not interested in reading by engaging them with books that are windows, mirrors, and sliding doors for them. Our class has to be safe. We cannot accept that certain students, because of their color, ethnicity, or gender, fail or cannot read. We cannot just have a diversity basket of books. You know, that little basket that we put all the diversity books in? Talk about othering. Then we have all the other books in a little basket. Nobody's going to go to that basket because it's the other. It's weird. It's strange. Okay? Look for books that show sameness. Blend all books together for students and parents. So don't have a basket, just have all the books on the shelf. And research your books. The majority of books written with black characters are written by white authors. So do a little bit of a research because a white author will have obviously a different biased perspective. Okay, how can we be welcoming in our class? We want to have materials in their native language. There are a lot of resources out there now where you can find books that are in Spanish, that are in Mandarin. So, you know, do a little bit of search. Learn a few phrases in their language. Hello, goodbye, how are you? Good to see you. Their face will light up. And even if you butcher it, it's better that you attempt it than not. Understand that your students are smart. They just don't have the English language skills. And I think that's super important that we think about these kids are smart. They're smart, but they just don't have this particular language skill. Okay, know how to pronounce and say properly their name and use their names. Lots of kids will Canadianize. Is that a word? They will use a Canadian name like Bill, and you're like, that is not your real name. Use their real name and pronounce it correctly. Don't shorten it. Don't say, oh, that's too hard for me to say, and I'm going to shorten it to L. Again, you wouldn't want somebody to just shorten your name without asking you, and it tells the kid that they're not worth it for you to actually, that they're not worth enough to you for you to actually figure out how to pronounce their name. So pronounce it properly and use their full name. Make new students as welcome as you can, even if they come midway through the year, and that's always tricky, but try to make them as welcome as you can. Know they are going to be nervous when they come into your classroom. They are dealing with culture, climate, country change, and try to connect with the family as soon as possible. I know that SAMUS, immigration here in Medicine Hat, often acts as that liaison. So if you have a child who is immigrated and you don't know how to get a hold of their parents, or you can actually contact them, and they will be the liaison, which is a super cool support. Okay, books now in our LA class. Books should, again, allow readers to see themselves. That Grace, going back to Grace Lynn, she never saw herself. And we need to have books that allow kids to see themselves, allow readers to see into the lives of others, allow readers to move from one end of this continuum to the other. And they need to develop their ability to empathize. So our white farm kids need to read books like Year of the Dog, because they also need to experience the full continuum. Be windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors. Just be books. No separation, no otherness, no book box race based on race, sexual identity, or ability. Mix them all up. Be talked about specifically, be considered as just one voice, and be evaluated for the invisible voice. So when you're looking at books, evaluate them for that invisible voice that maybe have a white Eurocentric bias. Okay, and again, these are just some children's books that are in the library. I've introduced you to a couple of these books, but again, there are a lot of amazing, amazing children's books out there that will be mirrors, windows, and glass doors for our kids. All right, that thus ends our time on inclusion in the classroom.